Why probiotics? Probiotics for people and animals. So I'm Andrea Schneider, health and fitness expert, breast cancer survivor and thriver, and I've got two of my friends with me today. So Karen, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Hey, Andrea. I'm a Healthy Gut Advisor, training health professionals and network marketing professionals. Super excited to be here today.
And Dr. Harris?
I'm Dr. Lee Harris. I've been a veterinarian for 40 years with a variety of particular interests, including behavior. New book out called The Good Life for Dogs, and I'm just really happy to be talking about probiotics.
Yeah, and so I saw Karen's kitty flanking her on top of her head there almost. And I remember when I had kitties, they'd always be like, probably one would be on my computer right now if I had a kitty still. And, yeah, and some of you know my escapades with Rosie the naughty dog. That's how I met Dr. Harris recently, the day that she ate chocolate cake. But today we're going to talk about probiotics. So I'm really fascinated. I've been reading Dr. Harris's book, and I make so many connections. And when I'm reading it, I actually forget that he's writing about animals, and I keep thinking he's talking about humans. And we've had conversations. It's so interesting. I never really thought of all the similarities of what an animal might be going through mentally, physically, and emotionally, and what they should be doing nutrition-wise. So, Dr. Harris, tell us a little bit about your thoughts about probiotics for our animals.
Okay. Well, I've always had an interest in probiotics. Interestingly enough, I was actually taking probiotic supplements myself in 1955 because they had removed a large section of my intestine. And I remember even as a 5-year-old, I understood the concept. I understood that you're putting good bacteria in there to help your intestine work. Now, obviously, we've gotten a lot more sophisticated recently, and particularly now, every day a new article comes out on some aspect of that. I've used them primarily for intestinal problems in dogs, but I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think there's lots we could do. I used to do a lot of bird work, and I raised parrots, and they're susceptible to a lot of bacterial diseases and yeast infections, and we'd often have to use probiotics to control those because parrots don't tolerate antibiotics very well. So largely GI problems, but my interest is also in behavior, and I deal with a lot of anxious dogs and so forth, and I'm particularly fascinated by the work about how the brain is affected by intestinal bacteria. The fact that they can eliminate a lot of the symptoms of autism in humans by giving antibiotics to eliminate most of the bacteria and then replacing them with better bacteria. We can measure in rats that you can change their whole response to stress by giving probiotics. And I will sometimes, as I did yesterday with a patient, recommend on an anxious dog where they've already done a lot of the normal things, I will often suggest adding a probiotic for whatever. It may not be a huge effect, but it's some effect and it's safe and makes sense. And we do have reason to think that could help with the behavioral aspects.
And so, and Karen, I'm going to ask your opinion in a second, but also Dr. Harris, so I know you're thinking about, or mentioning like probiotics when there's something already going wrong. What about as a preventive measure? So like starting on the probiotics before these things happen?
Yeah, and of course, it's just difficult to prove. That's the thing. In medicine, we always have to say, how much is it going to cost? And how much do we know that it's going to? If probiotics were free, I'd say every animal should be on them, even though we don't yet know enough exactly which organisms we should be supplying. I would say, yes, probably every well animal would benefit from being on that. My daughter has 2 new kittens. I put them on a probiotic. It's a question of how big an effect are we getting in a healthy animal? Hopefully, if we haven't messed up the animal with bad diet and antibiotics, then they came with a healthy microbiome to begin with. But yes, I would agree that more probiotics are probably better.
Right. And so, Karen, what do you have to say between, on the person's point of view?
Well, I think we are just beginning to understand the human microbiome as well as I believe the animal microbiome. So, Dr. Harris, I'm really glad that you're out there and covering that part of it. I know that when I first got my kittens, and this is one of them, they're brother and sister, one had diarrhea and the other one had constipation so bad he would cry. And as a nutritionist, I knew that there was something going on, probably probiotic-wise, but they were both eating the same food. And I mean, they were little, so the only thing they were getting was this pablum. So obviously, this pablum was affecting them differently. And so I thought, okay, well, I put myself on probiotics, and like you, Dr. Harris, I'm missing part of my intestinal tract as well. So I thought that was really interesting. So I think that probiotics are really important. Now, the difference that we can do over animals, and I don't know, Dr. Harris, if animals actually do this, but we can eat those fermented foods to help put some of that bacteria inside of our tract. So I think preventative-wise, we can definitely be on probiotics, as well as in cases of overpopulation, E. coli and salmonella and other bacteria that we have. But Dr. Harris, my question for you would be, in humans, as you know, we need that diversity of bacteria. We all have E. coli, we all have candidiasis, all different types of bacteria. Is it the same for animals? Like, can they end up getting a candida overgrowth, or can they end up getting even SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth? Can that happen with animals as well?
Absolutely. Although there's species differences. In birds, candidiasis is a huge problem. Yeast infections of the crop. If you put a bird on antibiotics, you're going to get candida in the crop, and even if you don't, you're probably going to. So that was something we dealt with a lot in them. Dogs and cats don't really seem to be that prone to candidiasis, to the yeast infections. They do, however, get what used to be called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Now, in fact, that's officially termed antibiotic-responsive diarrhea, at least in veterinary medicine, because the concept that there's too many bacteria in people, apparently that's true. There's not a quantitative increase in animals, but a dysbiosis of some sort, where they're just not in balance as far as the right bacteria there. Certainly happens, and it causes very, very chronic diarrhea. I have dogs that come in, they've been having really bad diarrhea for 6 months, and I say to the owner, how do you stand it? And they're quite willing to work with that.
And so do you put them on, would you put them on antibiotics and then probiotics, or are you able to get rid of that just with probiotics?
Usually you have to treat it first and get them back to a normal. And that's one of the general principles of medicine, is even if something is started by stress or started by a diet change or whatever, it's like a stone once it starts rolling downhill. Just correcting the initial conditions isn't going to stop the stone from rolling downhill. You got to bring it to a stop, then you can correct those things. So in my own practice, when I see animals, I always talk about, here's what we're going to do for this problem. Now, what are the predisposing causes, and what can we handle, and so forth. And even in a lot of the other things, like for instance, in autism or some of the other neurologic problems that they find that helps, they certainly have to put them on antibiotics first and kind of wipe out a lot of the bad guys and then replace them with good guys. What we actually do in small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or antibiotic-responsive diarrhea is we'll often use a very, very mild antibiotic. Typically, we use tetracycline because it's not really used for much of anything else. We use it at doses that are way below therapeutic doses, and it seems to work, but it only works until you take them off of it, unless you can correct the diet or whatever allowed the wrong bacteria to grow.
And that's interesting, because I think Dr. Harris, in the conversations we've had and reading his book, I think he's really on the same page with us, Karen. Whether it's people or animals, it really helps to get to the root cause first, treat what's going on in whatever way, try and correct something that maybe is going wrong, human, animal, and then move on to get healthier. Is that what I'm hearing you saying, kind of in layman's terms, Dr. Harris, and then Karen as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm curious. In the human world, we are finding now that we actually need to be feeding our bacteria. So, the complex carbohydrates, the inulin, the artichoke, those kinds of foods will provide that fuel for, in particular, Lactobacillus and bifidus, and from that they create other vitamins. B12, E. coli creates CoQ enzyme Q10. It's also going to create butyric acid and a couple of other lactic acids as well. Is that the same for dogs? Is it the same type of process?
Yes, and that's a good point, because I think in the long run, I think what we feed may make more of a difference than the probiotics. The original concept was that we were going to feed these healthy bacteria and they were going to multiply in the intestine, and then we wouldn't have to keep doing it. But all the evidence I've seen says we still have to, you have to continue to do it to continue to get that effect, unless you're feeding foods that are going to foster a new population of bacteria. And so certainly we do use prebiotics. Unfortunately, we can't get them to eat most of the fermented foods that are rich in good bacteria and all that. I have not gotten a dog to eat sauerkraut yet. But I think
try that with Rosie, my husky. She'd pretty much eat anything. I wonder if she'd eat that.
She eats cake.
She eats cake. We know that. If I put some cake with the sauerkraut, that would. But then I'd probably have another trip to the vet for the cake part.
Just leave out the chocolate part.
Yeah, vanilla cake with some sauerkraut. Yeah, yeah. And so, are there different qualities, like when some people are shopping for probiotics for their person or for their animals? So, are there certain things they should be looking for? Maybe we'll start with Karen and then Dr. Harris. So, what without mentioning any brand names or anything like that, like what is someone looking for? There's just we're flooded with things on the market. How does someone know how to make a good choice? Karen, what do you think?
That's a really good question, and I personally use a line that uses human microflora strains, and they're actually taken from feces sources and vaginal sources, and just for lack of the better word, repopulated, if you will. But one of the things, because I teach this, knowing that we have hundreds of different strains inside of our body, and in different parts of our body, I just truly believe that you should be switching up your probiotic each month for different strains. If you have a yeast overgrowth, Saccharomyces boulardii is going to help crowd that out, but you also still need the acidophilus and the bifidus to help create those short-chain fatty acids, which will also help in the breakdown of the microbiome of the yeast organism. So I don't know, I guess it was about 15 years ago, I just started switching. It just made sense to me one day when I learned, that there was all these different strains, that we should be switching up these strains each month, because if we just keep giving the same strain, then we're losing that biodiversity within us, and I think that can set us up for problems as well. The only thing I can say is that when it comes to probiotics, I really believe that you have to look at the label. If there's sugars in there and there's fillers in there, I've seen some with coloring in them. A probiotic should just be a probiotic. You don't need anything else in that probiotic. Some will add a prebiotic to it. I think that's okay, but if you're eating, vegetables, and then you really don't even need that in there. I honestly look for probiotic companies that have nothing else in there. What do you think, Dr. Harris?
Well, Karen, I have a question for you, because certainly my concern is, from all the studies, and I read more human studies than I do veterinary studies because there's more to the study, but quality is such an issue.
Yes.
The great majority of the probiotic products, when they've been analyzed, don't have what they say on the label.
Right.
And there's no law that says they have to. Supplements are not regulated in that way, so they can write, you've got 5 billion of this, and they may not have any of it. So the other issue, obviously, is, in theory, or we used to say, they need to just be live organisms when you took them. That may not be true, but so how do you prefer, like a refrigerated product, or do you think the microencapsulated products? What do you think helps keep them alive until you take them?
That's a great question, and it's, I'm seeing more and more probiotics on the shelf that say, shelf stable, and if you just think about the microorganisms, if they don't have their environment, how can they stay alive? So I'm agreeing with what you're saying. I have a tendency to buy my probiotics in the refrigerator, and they're shipped to me with, ice packs. I can't believe my cat today. He's never in it. It must be because you're on today, because ask Andrea.
Yeah.
He's never in our pictures.
Veterinarian, now the kitty's got to be in the show. Yeah.
So I just really, I look for refrigerated ones because, and I believe that the reason why we have such a high number when it comes to the probiotics is because you are going to have some die-off. And I truly believe that if it's refrigerated, there's less die-off. And so, and then again, it also goes back to what's in that probiotic. I just believe that if you've got, maltodextrin in there or some form of a sugar in there, that the bacteria is eating the sugar and is basically, it's no longer available to us. So I do look for refrigerated products. If I do have that client who's in a dire straits, or I can't send them something, I will send them to either the health food store, or if I know that the grocery store has a refrigerated section, I will tell them, this is the probiotic that I recommend over the shelf because it's refrigerated. So I do tend to stay with that, but then there's also different types of probiotics. There's dead cell wall probiotics, and they're in a homeopathic type solution, so they don't need refrigeration. And then there's soil-based organisms that don't need the refrigeration as well, so those ones are okay. But when it just comes to, let's say, Acidophilus bifidus, and those ones I would want refrigerated. Saccharomyces boulardii, I don't understand, but it doesn't seem to need refrigeration. But any probiotic that I get, everything's in the refrigerator, so I just keep it all in there. And if you think about it, what do we do with our fermented products as well? Essentially, we put them in the refrigerator to almost put them in that that suspended animated stasis, if you will. So that's how I feel, is that personally, if I'm going to take a probiotic, I just haven't been able to get the research for the ones that are sitting on the shelf, or if they have that the coating, the dark coating on them. I'm not sure, so I just always stick to the refrigerated ones and seem to get good results with it.
So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes here, so I just want to kind of put it in layman's terms a little bit. So if you are going to take a probiotic, it sounds like it's important for people as well as animals, and more is like not necessarily waiting till you're so sick that you start this. It's more of a preventive type thing for a good tummy. And Karen didn't mention, but she usually does, I believe, like about 70–80% of your immune system is in your gut, right? Is that correct?
Oh, I believe it's 90. And I always say that when I teach. Forget the 70 to 80%. Yeah. I think it's 90%, and it's going to go higher. What do you think, Dr. Harris?
Really, all those little, what we call Peyer's patches. If you do intestinal surgery, you're looking at you look at these little patches of lymphoid tissue, and you know that's what it is. The thing that I think is kind of the new frontier is really its effect on the brain. We know its effect on the intestine, the effect on the brain. That it's kind of a new concept, but it's true that the nerves from the intestine regulate your mood, and they've shown that the vagus nerve is a very ancient part of our anatomy. It actually regulates mood, and we can show that's one effect of probiotics. The probiotics do something in the intestine, sends a message up the vagus nerve that has calming effects, at least as great as Prozac. So there is good reason that's scientifically sound to be taking a probiotic for emotional mood control.
I have one question that I wanted to ask Andrea before we go. We're hearing a lot about leaky gut, and the connection between the leaky gut breaking that barrier within the intestinal tract and eventually wearing down the blood-brain barrier in humans, and we are now dealing with what's called inflamed brain. So we're seeing a lot of behavioral issues in humans. We're also seeing this in our animals. Can animals as well suffer with this leaky gut?
Oh, in fact, actually, yeah, certainly they can. What's interesting is that we started using that term long before they started using it in people, because in cats, one of the most common, probably the most common intestinal thing we see is inflammatory bowel disease. And once they started looking at biopsies, they realized that these little pores that are supposed to be narrow little pores that only let in nutrients were expanding, allowing bacteria and other things to get in contact with the immune system, which is essentially what they mean by the leaky gut. And I would say, well, in fact, they did one recent study, 300 cats with mild symptoms, throw up once in a while, that kind of thing. All but 2 out of 300 had inflammatory bowel disease changes, or what we'd call leaky gut type of things. So certainly that's a big deal. It's not just about the bacteria. It's about, you know, possibly food allergies, immune overstimulation. Cats just kind of react to everything much more. But absolutely, it's an everyday thing that we see a leaky gut cat. We don't call it that. We call it inflammatory bowel disease. But that's the nature of, to understand it, you've got to understand that the intestine is letting stuff through the big pores more than it should.
And I find this so fascinating because Karen and I have a different conversation pretty much every week, health related. And so much of what you say, Dr. Harris, really is the same thing we're saying with people. It sounds like when you're talking about animals, I mean, it's just, I never really made the connection until meeting you and reading your book of the similarities between animals and the health issues they may have and the way people have these same things. And so kind of as a little bit of an overview, maybe we should have led with this, it sounds to me like you're both saying, and I'm in agreement, that basically so much starts with our gut, whether an animal, your cat, your dog, a person. And so you got to start there, making yourself as healthy as possible. One way may be with the probiotics, and of course we know decreasing stress and exercise and eating right. Those are all pieces of the puzzle, kind of health components, and I'll get back to each of you because I think you'd both be in agreement with that. And so, and now focusing a little bit on the probiotics, so, and I agree with Karen, switching them up makes perfect sense, and I'm not sure, you know, is at that, what you said, switching them every month sounds good, or should maybe even switching them every couple of days, but having a really high quality, a company that you know you can trust, and taking it on a consistent basis. So, Dr. Harris, does that kind of sum up things? And so basically, if we could get our tummy going better, then hopefully that will move to the mood and the whole body and the physical and the feeling of health. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I agree with the rotating thing. Now, that sort of goes along. If we actually think that we're repopulating the gut, then it makes sense to rotate them so we get a little of this established, a little of that established, and so forth. If, on the other hand, as seems to be the case, it's more a matter of the bacteria are doing their thing, passing through, and they're not staying there to live, then a wider variety of bacteria in the same product. So I often will look for a product that's got 6 or 8 different strains in it, because we know they all do different things. The ones that affect your immune system don't affect your intestinal motility, and they don't affect other things. So, so a wide variety is good. We're trying to, it's an ecology thing. We're trying to establish a better ecology in our intestine, and certainly you're going to take more than one thing.
Mm-hmm. And I know, like yogurt. Do you both believe like yogurt is a good food to be eating to kind of get the nutrition in your body? No, Karen's nodding no on that one.
I think if you're making your own yogurt at home, I believe that there's definitely some beneficial in there. Yeah. I've got my cat's butt in the way. Yeah. But I'm sorry, just the yogurt that is commercially raised, you know, some of them will add the probiotics afterwards, but again, there's so much sugar in that product to begin with. I just really believe that the probiotics that have been added in good intention just eats all that sugar, so you just end up with this really lazy, fat, bloated, you know, bacteria that can't do anything that it's supposed to do for you in your intestinal tract. That's just me personally, and I would just rather get it from fermented foods, or, you know, playing around in my garden outside, you know, getting organic produce. I mean, you're going to get the, at the farmer's market mostly, you're going to get that microbiome. You're going to bring that into your body. I just don't think it's yogurt.
What do you think about yogurt, Dr. Harris?
I would agree with that. I used to have people give yogurt, and I'll have people give yogurt like to their cat for other purposes because, I mean, it's good quality protein, and I usually have unflavored yogurt, so you're not getting the sugars. The problem with yogurt is the number of bacteria. Currently, they're up to, now they say you need like 1 billion to 5 billion with a B bacteria a day to have the probiotic effect. You get about 100,000 in yogurt. So, sure, good thing, if you eat 5 gallons of yogurt, you're probably going to get enough bacteria.
About 500 pounds too, but yeah. Not
that it's the wrong stuff, although it could stand a wider variety of bacteria there. Mm-hmm. It's just a numbers game. There's just not enough bacteria there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember when I was in college, actually.
There are interesting studies that would suggest that even pasteurized yogurt, where the bacteria have been killed off and no additional bacteria have been added, does boost the immune system. And so probably some of the waste products that are produced by bacteria in the production of the yogurt may have some beneficial immune stimulation effects. But still, nowadays I tell people, you've got to find a good quality that you really trust, and it's fresh and it hasn't been sitting on somebody's, even in their freezer for a month, and you need to handle it properly and give it regularly.
Well, thank you both. This has been informative. I hope our viewers have found it interesting and they can take a few nuggets from our conversation today, and we will talk again soon. So thank you so much, Dr. Harris and Karen, for being with me here today, and I will see you all soon. Bye for now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.